The year was 1975. In a dimly lit conference room at EMI Records in London, 29-year-old Freddie Mercury sat across from a table of record executives, his dark eyes burning with conviction. Between them lay something extraordinary, a 6-minute musical journey that defied every rule the music industry had written. 3 weeks of obsessive studio work had culminated in this moment, and Freddie knew he was about to fight for something revolutionary. The song was called Bohemian Rhapsody, and it was unlike anything rock music had ever produced. Part ballad, part opera, part hard rock anthem, it was a sonic tapestry woven from Freddie's most ambitious dreams. But to the men in suits seated around that polished mahogany table, it represented a problem. Radio stations played 3-minute songs, disc jockeys needed predictable formats, and here was Freddie Mercury, with his theatrical presence and unwavering artistic vision, presenting them with what they considered commercial suicide. The recording process itself had been an act of pure creative defiance. For 3 weeks, Queen had transformed Rockfield Studios in Wales into their personal laboratory of sound. Freddie had arrived with fragments, a piano ballad he'd been nurturing, operatic passages that seemed to emerge from his classical training, and rock arrangements that demanded to be heard at maximum volume. Roger Taylor, Brian May, and John Deacon had watched their frontman orchestrate something that seemed impossible. A song that changed genres midstream, that demanded listeners surrender to its unconventional structure, that treated popular music like a canvas for pure artistic expression. Night after night, they had layered vocal harmonies that created an entire choir from their 4 voices. Freddie had conducted these sessions like a possessed maestro, his hands dancing through the air as he shaped each note, each pause, each dramatic crescendo. The operatic section alone required nearly 200 individual vocal tracks, each one precisely placed to create the illusion of a grand theatrical performance. When they finally heard the completed version through the studio monitors, they knew they had captured something magical, but they also understood they were about to challenge an entire industry's conception of what popular music could be. Now, in that EMI conference room, the battle lines were drawn. The executives spoke in measured corporate language about market research and radio formatting requirements. They explained that no major station would play a 6-minute song during peak listening hours. They presented charts and graphs that proved shorter songs generated more advertising revenue. They spoke of focus groups and demographic studies that suggested audiences wouldn't maintain attention through such an extended musical journey. Freddie listened with growing frustration, his fingers drumming silently against his leather jacket. These men saw music as a product to be manufactured and distributed efficiently. They calculated success in units shipped and chart positions. But for Freddie, Bohemian Rhapsody represented something far more precious. It was the sound of his soul translated into music, every note carefully chosen to create an emotional experience that couldn't be reduced or compromised. When they finished their presentation suggesting that Queen could easily trim the song to a more manageable 3.5 minutes, Freddie's response was immediate and uncompromising. He leaned forward, his voice carrying the quiet intensity that had already made him legendary among rock circles, and delivered words that would echo through music history. Not a single note would be cut, not one section would be abbreviated, not one moment of the artistic vision would be sacrificed for the convenience of radio programmers who lacked the imagination to recognize revolutionary art when it sat directly in front of them. The tension in that room became palpable as Freddie explained that he would rather walk away from EMI entirely than allow Bohemian Rhapsody to be butchered by commercial considerations. This wasn't merely stubbornness, it was an artist drawing a line between integrity and compromise, between authentic expression and manufactured entertainment. For 3 weeks, he and his bandmates had poured everything they possessed into creating something unprecedented, and now corporate executives were asking him to dismantle it for the sake of conventional wisdom. The standoff continued for what seemed like hours, with neither side willing to yield. Freddie remained calm but immovable, his conviction radiating through every word. He understood that this moment would define not only the fate of Bohemian Rhapsody, but the entire trajectory of Queen's artistic future. If they capitulated now, if they allowed fear of commercial failure to dictate their creative choices, they would never again have the courage to pursue their most ambitious visions. The silence in the EMI boardroom was deafening. Around a polished mahogany table sat some of the most powerful executives in the music industry, their expressions grave as they delivered what they believed to be an unavoidable verdict. Across from them, a 29-year-old man with penetrating dark eyes and an unmistakable presence listened intently, his fingers drumming silently against the leather armrest of his chair. The year was 1975, and Freddie Mercury was about to face one of the most defining moments of his career. The tape had just finished playing. 6 minutes and 8 seconds of what would become the most revolutionary song in rock history had filled the room with its operatic grandeur, its unexpected shifts, its bold defiance of everything the music industry thought it knew about commercial success. But the faces around the table told a different story. These weren't expressions of wonder or artistic appreciation. These were the calculated looks of businessmen who saw only problems where others might see genius. The head of radio promotion cleared his throat, breaking the tension that had settled like dust over the room. His words came measured and final, delivered with the authority of someone who had spent decades understanding the mechanics of commercial radio. Radio stations, he explained, operated on strict formatting guidelines that had been refined over years of market research and listener studies. 3 minutes was the absolute maximum for any song hoping to receive regular airplay. Anything longer was considered commercial suicide. The reasoning seemed sound from their perspective. Radio programmers worked with precise timing structures, fitting songs between advertisements, news segments, and weather reports like pieces in an intricate puzzle. A 6-minute song would disrupt everything, forcing stations to rearrange their entire programming blocks. Disc jockeys would revolt. Program directors would refuse to add it to their playlists. The song would die before it ever had a chance to reach the public. But there was more. The executives had come prepared with data, charts, and examples of other ambitious songs that had failed because they ignored the unspoken rules of radio formatting. They spoke of market research that showed listeners changing stations when songs ran too long, of advertising revenue lost when programming became unpredictable. This wasn't personal, they assured him. This was simply business, and business had rules that even the most talented artists couldn't break. The solution they proposed seemed reasonable to them, even generous. Cut the song in half. Release the first section as a single, perhaps save the operatic middle section for the album version. Radio would embrace it, sales would follow, and everyone would win. They had even identified the perfect cutting points, moments where the song could be trimmed without losing too much of its impact. It was a compromise that would satisfy both artistic vision and commercial reality. As these words filled the air, Freddie remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. He had spent months crafting every note, every harmony, every dramatic pause of this composition. He had pushed his bandmates to their limits, demanding perfection in ways they had never experienced. He had envisioned something that transcended the boundaries of rock, pop, opera, and ballad, creating a musical journey that could only exist in its complete, uncompromised form. The executives continued their presentation, unaware that with each word, they were not convincing an artist to see reason, but rather awakening something fierce and uncompromising within him. They spoke of market realities and commercial necessities, of the need to work within existing systems rather than against them. They painted a picture of inevitable failure if he refused to adapt his vision to their requirements. What they didn't understand was that they weren't just asking him to shorten a song, they were asking him to abandon everything he believed about the transformative power of music, to accept that art should bow to the convenience of commerce, to agree that true innovation was less important than fitting into predetermined molds. They were asking Freddie Mercury to become smaller, to make his vision more digestible, to compromise the very essence of what made his music revolutionary. The room waited for his response, confident that logic and business sense would prevail. After all, what artist would willingly sacrifice commercial success for the sake of artistic integrity? What musician would risk their career on a single song that defied every established rule of the industry? The answer, they would soon discover, was sitting right across from them, and his response would not only change the course of his own career, but reshape the entire landscape of popular music forever. The conference room at EMI Records felt heavy with expectation on that autumn morning in 1975. Through the towering windows of Manchester Square, London's grey sky cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table where 29-year-old Freddie Mercury sat, his dark eyes fixed on the collection of suited executives before him. In his hands, he held something they couldn't yet comprehend, a 6-minute masterpiece that would redefine the boundaries of popular music forever. The executives shuffled through their papers, their expressions ranging from bewildered to openly skeptical. They had listened to the playback of Bohemian Rhapsody 3 times now, each listen deepening their collective frown. This wasn't what rock songs were supposed to sound like. This wasn't what radio stations played. This wasn't what made money. John Reed, the label's managing director, cleared his throat and leaned forward. The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly, broken only by the distant hum of London traffic below. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of industry wisdom accumulated over decades of making stars and breaking dreams. Radio stations won't play it, he explained with practiced authority. 6 minutes is simply too long for commercial radio. The average song gets 3.5 minutes, 4 at the absolute maximum. Program directors have schedules to maintain, advertising slots to fill, audience attention spans to consider. This operatic experiment, however ambitious, however creative, would never find its way into the rotation that determined commercial success. Freddie listened without interruption, his fingers drumming silently against his thigh in a rhythm only he could hear. Behind his composed exterior, the fire that had driven him from Farrokh Bulsara to Freddie Mercury burned with increasing intensity. This wasn't just about radio play or commercial viability. This was about something far more fundamental, the right of an artist to create without compromise, to push boundaries without apology, to trust in a vision that others couldn't see. The room fell silent again as another executive joined the chorus of concern. The song had no clear structure, they argued. It started as a ballad, transformed into an opera, exploded into hard rock, and somehow circled back to a gentle conclusion. Where was the hook that radio programmers could identify? Where was the verse-chorus-verse formula that audiences expected? How could disc jockeys introduce a song that seemed to contain 3 different compositions within its unconventional length? But Freddie had spent months crafting every note, every harmony, every dramatic pause. In the studio, he had guided his bandmates through the most ambitious recording session of their careers. Brian May's guitar had soared through impossible solos. Roger Taylor's drums had thundered with operatic grandeur. John Deacon's bass had provided the foundation for musical architecture that defied every conventional rule. Together, they had created something unprecedented, something that captured the full spectrum of human emotion in under 6 minutes of pure artistry. The pressure mounted as the executives continued their case. Radio was the gateway to success. Without airplay, even the most brilliant composition remained trapped in obscurity. The music industry operated on simple mathematics. Shorter songs meant more plays per hour, more plays meant greater exposure translated to sales. Compromise wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Surely a talent as considerable as Freddie's could find a way to edit the composition, to extract the most commercially viable sections, to create a radio-friendly version that preserved the essence while embracing practical reality. They suggested cutting the operatic middle section, the part where multiple overdubbed voices created a choir of Freddie's singing in impossible harmonies. They proposed eliminating the hard rock finale, or perhaps starting the single at the piano ballad opening. Each suggestion felt like a knife cutting through the heart of his artistic vision, reducing 6 months of meticulous creation to a product designed by committee and focus groups. Freddie's response, when it finally came, was delivered with the quiet intensity that had always marked his most powerful moments. His voice carried no anger, no frustration, only absolute certainty. He would not cut a single note, not one measure, not one harmony, not one dramatic pause. The song existed as a complete artistic statement, and to diminish it would be to betray everything he believed about the power of music to transcend conventional boundaries. The room shifted uncomfortably as the young performer continued. If EMI couldn't support the vision that had brought Queen this far, perhaps it was time to find a label that understood artistry over algorithms. He had spent his entire career refusing to compromise his creative integrity for commercial convenience, and he wasn't about to start now. The song would be released in its full glory, or not at all. The executives exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their internal calculations. Queen was becoming increasingly valuable to the label, their previous albums showing steady commercial growth and critical acclaim. Losing them over a single song, however unconventional, could prove more costly than taking a calculated risk on an unusual release. But 6 minutes remained 6 minutes, and radio remained radio, and the mathematical realities of the music business hadn't changed simply because one performer refused to acknowledge them. Yet something in Freddie's demeanor suggested this wasn't mere artistic temperament or ego-driven stubbornness. This was a line drawn in the sand by someone who understood his own worth and refused to be diminished by others' limitations of vision. His success hadn't come from following conventional wisdom, but from trusting instincts that others dismissed as impractical or impossible. The meeting ended without resolution, but everyone present understood that a defining moment had occurred. Freddie Mercury had declared his unwillingness to compromise his artistic vision for commercial convenience, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The future of Queen's relationship with EMI, the fate of their most ambitious creation, and the trajectory of popular music itself hung in the balance of this fundamental disagreement between artistry and industry expectations. As the executives filed out, discussing contingencies and alternatives in hushed tones, Freddie remained seated, his conviction unshaken. Somewhere in London, radio programmers were making decisions about playlist rotations, disc jockeys were reviewing new releases, and music lovers were waiting to discover the next song that would capture their imagination. The battle for Bohemian Rhapsody had only just begun, but the first victory belonged to the artist who refused to surrender his vision to the comfortable predictability of conventional wisdom. October 20th, 1975, Studio 4 at EMI Records, London. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the mahogany conference table as Freddie Mercury sat facing a room full of executives, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to barely concealed frustration. For weeks, these men in their tailored suits had been wrestling with a problem that defied every convention of their industry. Queen had delivered their new single, and it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. 6 minutes and 55 seconds of pure audacity. That's what Bohemian Rhapsody represented to the record executives gathered in that sterile conference room. To them, it wasn't a masterpiece waiting to be unleashed upon the world. It was a commercial nightmare wrapped in operatic grandeur, a defiant middle finger to everything they understood about radio-friendly music. The song began as a gentle ballad, exploded into a full rock anthem, and somehow incorporated a mock operatic section that featured Galileo, Figaro, and Beelzebub all in the same verse. It was madness, they argued. It was unmarketable. It was career suicide. Freddie Mercury, just 29 years old, his dark hair perfectly coiffed despite the tension crackling through the air, listened to their concerns with the patience of a teacher explaining quantum physics to kindergarten students. His mustache, still a relatively new addition to his iconic look, twitched slightly as executive after executive voiced their objections. The room smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes, the ashtray overflowing with the nervous energy of men who had built careers on playing it safe. The lead executive, a man whose gray hair had gone white from decades of making safe bets on 3-minute pop songs, leaned forward with the weary expression of someone delivering bad news to a child. Radio stations, he explained, operated on rigid formats. Their playlists were carefully curated to maintain listener attention, and nothing over 4 minutes ever got airplay. The average listener's attention span couldn't handle such an epic journey. Disc jockeys needed time for advertisements, weather updates, traffic reports. A nearly 7-minute song would disrupt the entire flow of programming. But Freddie Mercury hadn't spent years crafting this opus to have it butchered by corporate fear. His fingers drummed against the polished table surface as he absorbed their arguments, his dark eyes reflecting a determination that had carried him from Farrokh Bulsara, a shy boy from Stone Town, Zanzibar, to the frontman of one of Britain's most promising rock bands. This wasn't just another song to him, this was his vision made manifest, a piece of his soul translated into melody and harmony. The executives presented their solution with the confidence of surgeons discussing a routine procedure. Cut the song in half, they suggested. Release the ballad portion as one single, perhaps the rock section as another. Or better yet, edit it down to a radio-friendly 3.5 minutes, keeping the most commercial elements while discarding the operatic middle section that would surely confuse mainstream audiences. They had done this countless times before, taking artistic ambitions and molding them into commercially viable products. Freddie's response came not as a shout or a dramatic storming out, though both would have been understandable given the circumstances. Instead, he delivered his verdict with the quiet authority of someone who had already won the argument before it began. No cuts, no edits, no compromises. The song would be released exactly as Queen had recorded it, or it wouldn't be released at all. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the tone of someone who had spent months perfecting every note, every harmony, every dramatic pause. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of London traffic outside. These executives had dealt with difficult artists before, prima donnas who threw tantrums over album artwork or demanded ridiculous tour riders. But this felt different. This wasn't artistic ego or celebrity posturing. This was a young man who genuinely believed he had created something that would change music history, and he was willing to walk away from his record deal rather than compromise his vision. What the executives couldn't understand was the journey that had brought Freddie to this moment of absolute conviction. They saw only the commercial risk, the potential for radio rejection, the nightmare of explaining to shareholders why they had backed a 6-minute and 55-second gamble. They couldn't see the countless hours Freddie had spent at the piano, layering vocal harmonies with the precision of a master architect. building something that had never existed before in popular music. The meeting stretched on, tension thick as London fog. Other band members had faced similar crossroads, moments where artistic integrity collided head-on with commercial reality. Most chose the safer path, accepting the edits, the compromises, the slow erosion of their original vision until what remained bore little resemblance to what they had initially imagined. But Freddie Mercury had not clawed his way from the margins of society, had not reinvented himself from a shy immigrant child into a rock and roll phoenix only to surrender his masterpiece to focus group mentality. As the executives realized their arguments were falling on deaf ears, as they recognized the immovable force sitting across from them, the dynamic in the room began to shift. This wasn't just about one song anymore. This was about the future of Queen, about whether EMI Records would support artistic ambition or retreat into the safety of formulaic pop music. The label had invested in Queen's potential, but potential meant nothing without the courage to back it completely. The meeting ended without resolution, but with a clear understanding. Freddie Mercury would not bend. The song would be released as recorded, or Queen would find another label willing to support their vision. As the executives filed out of the conference room, murmuring among themselves about impossible artists and commercial suicide, Freddie remained seated, his confidence unshaken by their predictions of radio rejection and commercial failure. But somewhere across London, a disc jockey named Kenny Everett was about to prove that sometimes the most impossible dreams require only one believer willing to press play. The revolution was about to begin, not in a corporate boardroom, but in the intimate space between a radio transmitter and millions of listeners waiting to discover that music could be so much more than they had ever imagined. Kenny Everett possessed the kind of restless energy that made conventional radio programming feel like watching paint dry. His shock of unruly hair and mischievous grin masked the soul of a true musical revolutionary, someone who understood that radio's greatest power lay not in playing it safe, but in introducing audiences to sounds they never knew they needed to hear. On this particular afternoon in late October 1975, Kenny sat in his cluttered home studio, surrounded by towers of vinyl records, demo tapes, and the organized chaos that defined his creative sanctuary. The package had arrived without fanfare, just another manila envelope among dozens that crossed his desk weekly. Inside, a simple note in Freddie Mercury's distinctive handwriting accompanied a white label test pressing. The message was characteristically direct, a personal copy of Queen's latest recording, shared between friends with explicit instructions not to play it on air. The song wasn't scheduled for official release, Freddie explained, and the record company remained undecided about its commercial potential. Kenny lifted the vinyl from its sleeve with the reverence of someone handling a rare manuscript. Bohemian Rhapsody. The label read in simple block letters. He had heard whispers about Queen's ambitious new direction, rumors of a song that defied every convention of popular music. But nothing could have prepared him for what emerged from his speakers when the needle found its groove. The opening piano melody, delicate as morning frost, gave no indication of the sonic journey that lay ahead. Freddie's voice entered like a whispered confession, vulnerable and intimate, singing of a man who had just killed another man. Kenny found himself leaning forward, drawn into the narrative with the fascination of someone discovering a new continent. This wasn't just a song, it was a complete emotional universe contained within a single piece of music. As the ballad section gave way to the operatic middle passage, Kenny's eyes widened with something approaching disbelief. Galileo, Figaro, and Beelzebub danced through harmonies that shouldn't have worked together, but somehow created perfect musical sense. The vocal arrangements layered upon themselves, like architectural blueprints, each voice contributing to a structure that grew more magnificent with every repeated listening. This was what happened when genius refused to be contained by commercial expectations. The final rock section exploded from his speakers with the force of a dam bursting, transforming the gentle confession into an anthemic declaration of independence. Kenny found himself unconsciously nodding along, his DJ instincts recognizing something that transcended conventional radio wisdom. This wasn't just good music, this was the sound of boundaries being obliterated, of artistic ambition achieving perfect execution. When the song ended, Kenny sat in silence, processing what he had just experienced. His decades in radio had taught him to recognize instantly whether a song would connect with audiences. But Bohemian Rhapsody existed in a category entirely its own. It was simultaneously too complex for casual listening and too compelling to ignore. It demanded attention in ways that 3-minute pop songs never could, yet somehow felt as natural as breathing. November 1975. The marble floors of EMI Records' London headquarters echo with the measured footsteps of executives who believe they understand the pulse of popular music. In a sterile conference room adorned with gold records and industry awards, 29-year-old Freddie Mercury sits across from a panel of men in sharp suits, their expressions a mixture of concern and condescension. Between them lies a single piece of recorded music that will either make or break careers, reshape an industry, or fade into the forgotten archives of ambitious failures. The song is 6 minutes long. In the world of 1970s radio, this is not just unusual, it's commercial suicide. Radio stations demand 3-minute packages, neat and digestible segments that fit between advertisements and news updates. The executives lean forward, their voices reasonable and practiced, explaining the mathematics of airplay, the science of commercial success. They speak of market research, focus groups, and the unforgiving nature of radio programmers who control the gateway to mass audiences. Freddie listens, his dark eyes studying each face around the polished table. His fingers drum silently against his leather jacket, a nervous habit that betrays none of the volcanic determination building within him. These men see numbers where he sees art. They hear minutes and seconds where he hears the architecture of human emotion. The song they're discussing isn't just music to him, it's a piece of his soul committed to tape. Every note and harmony carefully crafted through months of obsessive perfectionism. The conversation reaches its inevitable conclusion. Cut the song, remove the opera section, eliminate the ballad opening, transform 6 minutes of revolutionary artistry into 3 minutes of radio-friendly conformity. The executives speak with the confidence of men who have guided countless careers, who have transformed raw talent into commercial gold. Their logic is unassailable, their experience undeniable. In their world, compromise is not surrender, but wisdom. But Freddie Mercury was never destined to inhabit their world. His childhood in Zanzibar, his boarding school years in India, his immigrant experience in London, all of these had taught him that survival often meant preserving the very things others wanted him to abandon. His voice, when he finally speaks, carries the weight of every rejection, every closed door, every moment when conformity seemed like the easier path. The response is simple, delivered with the quiet intensity that would become his trademark. If they cannot see the vision, if they cannot trust the artistry, if they insist on mutilating his creation, then perhaps they are not the right partners for this journey. The words hang in the air like a challenge thrown down in an ancient duel. The executives shift uncomfortably, suddenly aware that they are not dealing with a typical musician seeking approval, but with an artist who views his integrity as non-negotiable. What happens next becomes the stuff of legend, but legends often obscure the very human fear that preceded the triumph. As the meeting dissolves into tense negotiations, Freddie knows he is gambling everything. Queen's previous albums have achieved modest success, but they remain far from superstars. Defying the label could mean the end of recording contracts, the collapse of dreams that have consumed years of struggle and sacrifice. Yet somewhere in London, a disc jockey named Kenny Everett possesses an advanced copy of the forbidden song. Everett, known for his irreverent approach to radio and his willingness to champion music that defied conventions, makes a decision that will change everything. On his Capital Radio show, he announces that he has something special, something the record company doesn't want played. The very prohibition becomes the attraction. The 6 minutes of Bohemian Rhapsody pour through radio speakers across Britain like nothing anyone has ever heard. Opera collides with rock, ballad melts into bombast, and three distinct musical movements weave together with the precision of a classical symphony and the raw power of electric rebellion. Listeners call the station demanding to hear it again and again. The song becomes not just music but an event, a shared experience that transforms passive listening into active participation. Within days, the impossible begins to happen. Radio stations that had initially rejected the song suddenly find themselves flooded with requests. Record stores report customers asking specifically for the single, the very length that industry experts had declared commercially toxic becomes its greatest asset, each replay building anticipation for the next musical movement, each listening revealing new layers of complexity and emotion. The charts tell the story with mathematical precision. Bohemian Rhapsody enters the UK singles chart and begins its relentless climb. Week after week, it ascends through the rankings, powered not by industry manipulation or promotional campaigns, but by the simple force of listeners who recognize something extraordinary when they hear it. Radio programmers who had initially dismissed the song now scramble to secure copies, their earlier resistance forgotten in the face of undeniable public demand. When the song reaches number 1, it doesn't simply claim the position and move on like countless hits before it. Instead, it establishes residency at the summit, week after week, refusing to be displaced by newer releases or more conventional offerings. The British public has spoken with their wallets and their radio dials, transforming Freddie's act of artistic defiance into a commercial phenomenon that confounds every expert prediction. 9 consecutive weeks. For more than 2 months, Bohemian Rhapsody dominates the British charts, its unprecedented success serving as a daily reminder to industry executives that audiences hunger for something more complex than they had been offered. The song's structure, which had seemed like commercial suicide, proves to be its greatest strength. Listeners don't just hear the song, they experience it, following its emotional journey from intimate confession through operatic theater to explosive rock catharsis. The impact extends far beyond chart positions and sales figures. Young musicians across Britain and beyond hear Bohemian Rhapsody and suddenly understand that the boundaries they had accepted as immutable were nothing more than suggestions. Recording studios that had enforced strict time limitations begin to reconsider their policies. Radio stations that had rejected anything over 4 minutes start to question their own assumptions about audience attention spans. Freddie Mercury, the immigrant boy who had learned English as a second language, who had faced rejection and ridicule for his theatrical ambitions, who had been told repeatedly that his vision was too grand for commercial success, watches his creation transform the very industry that had tried to diminish it. The executives who had demanded cuts and compromises now study the song's success, searching for lessons they can apply to other artists, other projects. But the real victory extends beyond commercial triumph or industry validation. In refusing to compromise his artistic vision, Freddie had demonstrated something profound about the relationship between creator and audience. He had trusted that listeners possessed the sophistication and attention span to engage with complex music, and they had rewarded that trust with unprecedented loyalty. The 6 minutes that had seemed like an eternity to radio programmers became a journey that audiences wanted to take repeatedly. As the ninth week concludes and Bohemian Rhapsody finally begins its descent from the summit, its legacy is already secure. The song has not simply succeeded, it has redefined success itself. It has proven that artistry and commercial appeal need not be mutually exclusive, that audiences will embrace complexity when it serves genuine emotional expression, that the courage to resist compromise can sometimes be the very thing that ensures lasting impact. The young man who walked into that EMI conference room facing pressure to conform emerges as something entirely different, an artist whose refusal to accept limitations has permanently expanded the possibilities for everyone who follows. His response to being told his song was too long for radio has become more than a moment of personal triumph. It has become a template for how creative vision can reshape entire industries when backed by unwavering conviction and extraordinary talent.